Now, a day of horror in Afghanistan. As Nick Schifrin reports, it comes amid a bloody week there as the United States is about to enter its 18th year of fighting in that South Asian nation.
In a country fighting for its future, the bombs today found the children who were learning to build it. Gurney after Gurney after Gurney of Shia teenagers who were studying for college entrance exams killed by a suicide bomber. Boys and girls who dream big, none of whom will ever see their 20th birthday. Family members were in shock and had to say goodbye.
My brother was studying at the education center and he was killed in the blast. I'm here to receive his body.
This was their classroom where hundreds studied. The whiteboards where they learned, the benches where they sat, and the books from which they read, all stained by their blood. There was no claim of responsibility, but attacks on Shia are usually by the Sunni extremists of ISIS. The group has targeted lightly guarded schools, mosques, and cultural centers after being weakened by U.S. and Afghan forces. 70 miles to the south, the strategically important city of Ghazni lies on the country's primary highway, and today residents picked up the pieces after a 5-day siege. One of the city's markets was gutted, and many homes are now piles of rubble after fighting between the Taliban and the Afghan army. Outside a local military base, army vehicles are burned and abandoned. Nearly 200 fighters, soldiers, and civilians died in the city. At one point, bodies filled a corridor at the provincial hospital. Over the weekend, local TV footage showed buildings burning and Taliban fighters walking freely through the city's streets. The fighting forced residents to flee. They were stopped at Afghan checkpoints, escaping with only what they could carry.
There was no electricity, no water, and no food. We were living in hunger.
Today in Ghazni, authorities are back in charge and starting to clean up. Afghan soldiers patrol the streets and show off what they call a captured fighter. They reclaim the city, but they didn't defeat the Taliban, admits Afghan battalion commander Fazur Rahman Khan.
We pushed back the enemy from the city completely by force. Where I'm standing now is the front line. The Taliban are still around the city.
The U.S. military admits the Taliban controls 14% of the country in dark red. 30% is contested in light red. And the Taliban continue to launch attacks. In Baghlan today, Taliban fighters overran an Afghan army base and killed 36 soldiers. Yesterday, fighters captured an entire company of Afghan soldiers in Faryab. And in the south, in Zabul, they attacked a police checkpoint and killed 4 officers. Tonight, in Kabul, outside the school, a small memorial and a candlelight vigil for the victims and for another deadly day.
For more on the attacks today and where efforts to both fight and engage the Taliban stand, I'm joined from Kabul by Sultan Faizi, the bureau chief for IHA, a Turkish news agency. And here in studio with me is David Sedney. He's a senior associate with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a Washington think tank. He also served in the U.S. Embassy in Kabul and was a top Pentagon official working on Afghanistan and Pakistan during the Bush and Obama administrations. Thank you to you both. Sultan, can I start with you? We've just seen this horrific video from Kabul today. What does it feel like in the city right now?
People are really pessimistic about their security, especially in that neighborhood, because in that neighborhood, the Islamic State has carried out several deadliest attacks that has, really caused serious, damages, and people are very cautious because the structure of the security inside Kabul has kind of changed. Because you have blast walls everywhere, so it has got a military kind of face in the Kabul city. So every day people have fear and they're scared of suicide attacks or coordinated attacks. Throughout the city, people actually are pessimistic about the government, and people have been raising lots of questions, especially in the recent weeks that Taliban and other groups have launched deadliest attacks.
Some of the pessimism, David Sedney, that we've seen in Kabul extends, of course, throughout the country, and this attack in Ghazni is significant. But the Afghan army did succeed, right, in keeping the Taliban from taking over the city. Do you see that as a success?
Well, it's one of those things where the military success doesn't necessarily equal a political success. But militarily, the Afghan army proved again, as it has repeatedly over the 4 years since the U.S. pulled most of our combat forces out, that they can take on and defeat the Taliban anytime there's a head-to-head military confrontation. But the cost that that military confrontation exacts in civilian lives, in disruption, undermines the credibility of the government, undermines people's confidence in the government. And that is in many ways the main purpose of these attacks. That while the Taliban would love to take the city and hold it permanently, even if they can't, this kind of attack advances their political objectives, which is especially important in the potential run-up to peace talks.
I want to talk about those peace talks, but Sultan, I want to come back to you just for one question. How do people in Afghanistan respond to the increased number of attacks that we're seeing lately from the Taliban across the country?
Basically, people, want security and public services. So the government, from one side, we have been witnessing that the approach of the government towards the people for giving a better public service has been weak. And that's why, especially in terms of justice, Taliban actually in some areas have been the priority for people to go and seek justice because they are very quick and there is no corruption or bribery, anything like that. But still, there are many people afraid of war, afraid of Taliban.
David Sedney, as you see the Taliban using different tactics across the country, do you see them trying to prove, both to Afghans and to Americans, that they contain leverage not only over some of the country, but as the U.S. is pursuing peace talks with the Taliban?
Well, that's very accurate. The Taliban have opened up to peace talks following a really impressive peace plan proposed by President Ghani earlier this year, and most importantly, a ceasefire that President Ghani offered a little over a month ago, and the Taliban accepted for part of the time. He offered a one-week ceasefire, the Taliban accepted for 3 days. There's supposed to be another such ceasefire next week. Both the government and the Taliban have said they are thinking about joining in that ceasefire, although neither has formally proposed it. Historically, both in Afghanistan and elsewhere in insurgent wars, before there's peace talks, before there are ceasefires, the insurgent side mounts additional attacks in order to gain credibility, prove their power, and ideally seize some territory. So that is what I think is happening overall. At the same time, there are some within the Taliban who are questioning continuing the war. Some of them, after the last ceasefire, did not go back to the battle. Some of them established local ceasefires in some areas in Afghanistan. The Taliban wants to maintain its unity, and so by forcing the fight, it is trying to prove to its wavering members that they are the path of the future. And of course, all of this in the end depends on whether these peace talks go forward, and that is still very nascent, very early stages, may come to fruition, but may not.
And from your perspective, are there elements of the Taliban leadership who want to pursue peace?
Yes, definitely. There are elements of the Taliban leadership who want to pursue peace, and even more so, the Taliban fighters, and the people who support the Taliban. The Taliban have to be responsive to political pressure themselves. And those Taliban who want peace have a very strong voice right now. At the same time, there are hardliners who want complete victory and who don't want peace. So the Taliban leadership has to have a lot of discussions inside before it moves ahead. And of course, on the government side, there are some of the same divisions.
And Sultan Faizi, I assume that from the Afghan people's perspective, the desire, frankly, is for peace after so much war, right?
Exactly. When the Taliban entered the cities during the truce on the Eid days, people were actually acting very differently. They actually saw a spark of hope for for a longer-term truce or peace talks.
David Sedney, briefly in the time we have left, it was a tough day. There's a lot of pessimism when it comes to Afghanistan, especially those of us who spent a lot of time there, but is there also hope?
I believe there's hope. I think that the chances for peace today are the best they have been in the 18 or so years that I've been working on Afghanistan. That doesn't mean that they're great. It means that they exist. I do have to say there are other actors involved: Russia, Iran, Pakistan, all of whom can play important roles there. This is going to be a complex path towards peace, but I believe that it exists if there is sufficient will on all sides.
David Sedney, Soltan Faizi, thanks to you both.